this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or
The
news.
single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Today's guest challenges one of the biggest assumptions in modern leadership, that if you just hire smart, talented people, high performance will follow. Dr. Vanessa Druskat is an associate professor at the Peter T. Paul College of Business and Economics at the University of New Hampshire and an internationally recognized expert in leadership and team performance. She has advised leaders and teams at more than a dozen Fortune 500 and Global 500 companies, helping them translate research into real-world results. She's also the co-author of one of Harvard Business Review's most influential articles on emotionally intelligent teams. An article so impactful has been selected 6 times for inclusion in HBR's most valued collections, and she's received multiple awards for both her research and her teaching. In her book, which we'll be talking about today, The Emotionally Intelligent Team, she makes a powerful case that team performance isn't primarily about individual talent. It's about the norms teams build around trust, candor, accountability, and how they manage emotion together. Vanessa, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Clint. It's a pleasure to be here.
So good to have you. So I like to think about all the guests who come on the podcast as superheroes, and every superhero has a backstory or an origin story. So, what's yours? How did you get to where you are today?
Well, good question. But you threw me off by calling me a superhero. No one's ever called me that before. My kids and my husband certainly wouldn't. So my backstory is it's a couple of things. I started working young. I grew up in a farming community, and I started working on farms when I was 12. And I worked in some great teams. And I also was a bit of an athlete when I was in high school and had great teams. But then when I got to the work world, the teams were just terrible. And they were competitive. And the thing that bothered me the most was when people were competitive around me, I just did the same thing. So I went from being someone who loved to help others, really loved to help build the team, to someone who was just becoming another, poor team member in the workplace. So when I went back to school to get a graduate degree, and I focused on teams. And so first I did a master's degree, learned a little bit there. Then I decided to go back again and get a doctorate. And in both of those degrees, I focused on teamwork. Big question was, how do you build a great team? And when I was in school, there was just not much out there. Everything focused on personalities and hiring. And I just thought, no. My personality's been the same all along. And my skills and, I could be your best team member, or I could be your most competitive one, if that's what everybody's going to be, and least helpful. But so I knew there was something about the environment. I'd also done a lot of traveling in my youth. My parents were international educators. And so I knew that cultures, you behave differently in different cultures. So when I started studying teams, I started seeing different cultures in teams. And some cultures pulled out people's best, and some cultures didn't. And so that's what I focused on in my research. So that's a long. Anyway. Let me stop there and ask you for follow-ups. I hope that made some sense.
No, it did. And in the book, you talk about you had a lot of jobs early on, like 28. It was a
Yes.
big number.
Yes, indeed. I did a lot of jobs. I did everything when I've been, especially when I was young, working my way through college and all those things. I've done everything from being a dishwasher to a camp counselor to a shoe salesperson. But then I worked my way finally into human resources kind of stuff. And then I went back to school.
Well, that's good. That does give you a lot of background in working with different teams then. And is the book just to add on to all the research you've done, or what inspired you to write it?
Sure. So, my colleague and I wrote that Harvard Business Review article that you mentioned, my colleague Steve Wolf and I, and it just got a lot of attention. And so I had a lot of requests from Harvard Business School Press asking me if I would please write a book because it was getting a lot of attention. The article was. And, I'd been a really good academic, a really good researcher, and most of my research had been done in organizations. So I was in companies a lot, all kinds at different levels and things. But I hadn't actually taken the model and tried to apply it, right? So I hadn't actually coached teams with it or coached leaders. And I wanted to see what happened. So I just said to them, look, no, I got to get out on the road and see what happens and get some lessons. And so, much to the chagrin of my academic colleagues, I kind of got out on the road and it was just a blast and it really worked. And so I can say more about that. But so then I finally called up HBR after we contacted throughout the years and I said, I'm ready. And they said, great, go for it. And that's the story, really.
I always like people who roll their sleeves up and get out and talk to the real world people. That's all good.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. You do it all the time, so you know.
And you have such good stories in the book. I really appreciated those. We'll talk about some of those along the way. Let's just get some semantics out of the way because I like to make sure we define things the way you define them. So what exactly is team emotional intelligence, which you refer to as team EI, and how does that differ from the emotional intelligence of individuals?
Sure. So individual emotional intelligence is basically a set of four skills that an individual holds. So it's your awareness of your emotion, management of your emotion, awareness of others' emotions. So do you focus on their emotion when you're talking to them and such, and then managing others' emotions. So team EI is a little bit like managing others' emotions, but it's about managing the emotions of the group. So team EI is about building an environment with norms, being a culture. So it's about a culture, a set of norms, and I'll define norms for you in a minute, that build an environment that's emotionally safe, that's trusting, and that brings out the best in people and sets a team up for high performance. So I can say much more about that. I lay it all out in the book, but it's not about individuals. It's about the agreements that the team members make. This is how we're going to behave around here, and it supports performance.
It's kind of like having, you can have the best individual pieces, but if they don't mesh well together, then it's probably not going to be a symphony in the end. So
Exactly. And so let me give you an example. So the quintessential emotional intelligence skill is empathy. And, so you're tuning into others' emotions and you're listening carefully. Well, you can't use that skill in most teams because nobody else is using it. So you have to build an environment where that's valued, where you create that, and that's what I advocate in the book. So I talk about how you build that kind of environment. And lo and behold, that's the kind of environment that builds trust and motivates. So I can say a lot more about that.
So this may be, you may have just answered this question, but a lot of organizations, they think, and let's just go out and find the A players, the best of the best, and we'll stack the team with them. But that's not really how it works in complex teams, is it?
Not at all. And, I'm not the only one to say this. There's been research out of Harvard, out of the University of Pennsylvania, my own research, and even Google did a study once. They were wondering what differentiates the greats from the not so great under their one culture, right? They thought, hey, we got a great culture. Why aren't all the teams great? And inevitably, it comes down to not the individuals. And Google spent a lot of money trying to see, was it this personality, this skill, that? No, it's about what you create in the room together. And that outperforms. So if you can have a mediocre team but if everybody's interacting well and bringing out the best in one another, then you will outperform a team of geniuses, right, with top skills that aren't working with one another, that aren't listening, and et cetera, et cetera. So I can say a lot more about that if you're interested. But that basically, we've known for a long time that building a team is not about building a team of geniuses. It's about making the most of what you've got in the team and bringing out the best in one another.
I think another thing you said in the book that I guess I didn't think about it until you wrote it, and then I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, is the team's culture isn't necessarily the company's culture.
Oh, gosh, no. No, and sociologists who are big sociologists originally started studying cultures, right? And anthropologists too, right? And they've always said it's the local culture. It's the culture that touches you. It's not the bigger culture. So, I study cultures in organizations. I go into one organization and I go from team to team to team, and every team has its own culture. And so the big research question that I've been studying for 30 years is what differentiates the highest performing teams in an organization from the average performing teams, not from the poor teams, but from the average, because most teams are average. I learned this research paradigm from my mentor. And so what I do is I look at the cultures of the greats, the cultures of the average, and I figure out what is it that the greats do that the average don't do. And that's been the focus of my research. That's the team emotional intelligence model. It's these things that are, a lot of them are common sense, but they're not common practice in teams. And let me tell you, I've spent 30 years in organizations studying teams and 15 years out there working with teams. And it'll blow you away how, it won't blow you away because I know you do project management. It's just there are so many teams that aren't doing what everybody knows you should do because leaders don't know how to do it.
I think there's a saying that common sense isn't all that common. So I think that's what you're running into.
Yeah, bingo.
So we were just kind of talking about how high-performing teams really produce an effective culture. And then I remember reading in the book that teams are systems. So if I'm a CEO listening to this, what does it mean to take a systems approach to team performance instead of a talent approach?
Sure. So systems are about interaction. So the power of the system, you think about a mechanical system, right? One that's the one that powers your car. You don't have all these pieces side by side. You have them interacting. And it's those interactions that create the beauty of the engine, get the car going. Well, individuals in the team need to interact. But here's the catch that most people don't realize. Every interaction you have inside or outside of a team generates emotion. That's what emotional intelligence is. It's picking up on those interactions. But when you've got a team, everybody's having an emotional reaction to everyone else in the team. And so you have to really recognize that you've got to build an emotionally comfortable and an environment that basically meets the emotional needs of the individuals so you can check that box and move on to a relentless focus on the task, move on to the project management. But if you don't focus on that early stuff, if you don't take care of the individuals so that they'll continue to interact in an effective way, then you're going to run into problems. And I would say that one of the biggest ahas people have from reading the book or from getting to know team emotional intelligence is just really the critical importance of spending some time building the needs or satisfying the needs of the individuals, which is about building relationships, trust.
I'm going to get these numbers wrong because I don't have them in front of me, but I was, I guess, not surprised, but a little bit surprised at the emotional neural network processes, I think 11 million data points a second, and the cognitive one only does like 4,000 a second or something, if I remember. Something.
Oh, no, the cognitive one is more like 20 or 30.
It's ridiculously small, yeah.
It's really, because it's meant to be, higher order thinking. But the emotion, we basically have what neuroscientists consider two systems in the brain. And they simplify it by talking about two systems. One is the emotion system, and one is the sort of the IQ cognitive brain. We evolved first. Our ancestors just used the emotion system. We didn't have language, right? We actually had tougher problems to solve, like the Ice Age and such. We grew a bigger brain. We grew a bigger cognitive brain, but we never let go of our emotion brain. And so we pick up, in order to save our lives, we pick up 11 million bits of information per second. And the other thing that's really interesting is that before you even enter the room of a team or enter the online Zoom or whatever you're using to meet people with, people are prepping their brains already. The brain is prepping the person for what they're going to find. And you don't miss a trick. When people don't listen to you, when people don't seem to care about you, when people ignore you, they don't miss it. And it scares the brain. The brain is designed to save your life, and it occupies attention that keeps you, it creates conformity, it occupies what you could be using to think and contribute to the team. So anyway, this is again another contribution when we talk about team emotional intelligence, why you need to meet these individual needs that calm the brain down, that make you feel like you belong, you matter here, this is who you are here, and we value you, and then boom, 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 you can make mistakes and you can be more innovative, et cetera, et cetera.
That's great. And we'll talk more about that because that's, I think, a really important point. I'm an engineer by training, so I love numbers. And there were some surveys you mentioned earlier in the book. One found that redesign of organizations around teams was like the top trend at that point. Another found that the top workforce strategy was team collaboration. Yet exit surveys taken during the mass exodus of employees during the pandemic and right afterwards listed the top 3 reasons for leaving as they don't feel valued by the organization, they don't feel valued by their managers, and they don't feel a sense of belonging at work. So it seems like we have a pretty big disconnect here.
Really big disconnect. And everybody thinks, well, we've got adults in the room. And so we hire good people. We know, and it's true. We know how to manage ourselves, but what they don't realize is that we know how to manage what we look like and how often we contribute. The other thing there's just fascinating research on this that unfortunately, the world hasn't heard about. Like, one of the most fun things in writing this book was finding all these studies that I knew that leaders would learn from. Like, so for example, this one study that shows that people are really good at contributing just about the same amount of information as everyone else without really sharing their best information. Because in the information age, you share your best ideas, then you're giving away your gold, right? And in those surveys you were talking about, one of the biggest worries of leaders and CEOs is that people are not transparent with what they're sharing. I can say more about that if you're interested, but leaders have known for a long time that you have to somehow motivate people to share their best, and that becomes about building that environment where you do trust, where you do feel like you belong, and you're part of something bigger than yourself. And I got to tell you, everyone wants that. Nobody wants to go into a team where they have to guard themselves. And I've talked to enough team members and seen enough teams that it's a high point in people's career when they belong to a team where everyone trusts everyone. You don't have to be so guarded. You can be yourself, and you can really perform well together. Feels good.
Yeah, I think most people have probably experienced the attitude of some people is that I'm going to hold this because the only way I can rise is if you get lower, right? And it's the competition, you called it. And yet I've also most of my career has been spent with teams that are the opposite, which is where it's in my best interest so that you know everything that I know so you can help me with what I'm doing. And I think when you work in a culture like that, it's, to your point, it's just so much more powerful. And people often will deflect if somebody, so let's say I had an idea and I shared it in a meeting you were with and you didn't share that idea later. And they say, that's a great idea. You're probably going to go, well, actually, Clint said that. So it's not about me raising myself. It's about us together, right, going forward.
Right. Absolutely. And, one thing, you mentioned the word belonging before, which came, the pandemic at the end. People were leaving left and right. And it became a catch-all term. It's been used a lot. But what happened to me, let me take a little bit of diversion here. After when I first went out on the road with the TMEI model with my colleagues, and we started testing it in various places, I couldn't believe how well it worked. And I thought, what's going on here? What is it? Why is it it's bringing people together and it's opening people up and they're, and at some point I knew I had to write the book. And so I kind of left my colleagues. They continued doing the work. I went back to the office, the university, and I bumped into this thick research database on belonging. Psychologists have been studying it for ages. And it turns out that belonging is the need that rules them all. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, I don't know if you
Oh, yeah.
It's the need that rules them all. Everything underneath that, my need for control, my need for trust, my need for safety, all that fits in to my belonging. It helps me feel like I belong, which is ultimately what I want. And I could say more about that if you want, but it is really the ultimate. And what is belonging? Belonging is I'm genuinely accepted, I'm known, understood, valued, and supported. And I support others. It's not just they support me. We support one another. That's the kind of community people want to be in. And I can say a lot more about that. Now, is it always perfect when you use TMEI? No. It's waxes and wanes. But the idea is if you know what the ingredients are to get there, you can move up. And like any relationship, I think about my relationship with my husband or my kids. It's, what you want is you want to hit the good stuff and know what it takes to get up there. And then when you come down, you come back up faster, So anyway, let me stop there.
No, please.
But yes,
I'm happy to let you go. So I will talk about belongingness again a little bit later on, but that's a good introduction. Another thing that I thought was interesting is, you say conventional wisdom has what they call the list of characteristics for winning teams,
yes.
But you actually think there's something else that's more important, which is the quality of interactions. Why do you think the quality of, first of all, how do you define an interaction? And then how do you think the quality of interactions is a better predictor of success?
Well, first of all, interactions, as I said earlier, because teams are systems. And so the way teamwork works, when you're making a decision, all right. So every team is a little bit different. Let me say that. Some teams come together for just information sharing. Some teams come together to make decisions together. So, there's a little bit of difference, but the more you have to interact to get your work done, even if it's just a few people that have to interact, the more important your interactions become. And what you want are interactions where I say one thing and it reminds you of something else, and we learn from one another and we build something together that neither one of us knew, right? That's what makes teams better at decisions than individuals. And we've known for a long time that when everyone gets heard in the team, teams make far better decisions than individuals. I mean, if the other thing is, let me just take a little bit of a side deviation here. The brain is not designed to be rational. Okay. The brain, I've already mentioned, it's designed to save your life, but it's also designed to save your energy. And basically, our brains make quick decisions. We see certain things. We don't see everything. And our brain wants to, focus in and blah, blah, blah. But what happens is that we miss things. And so Herb Simon, who got the Nobel Prize in economics, he was a political scientist, actually, back in the 1950s, his lifetime contribution was that we make irrational decisions alone. You want to approach rationality? Get a team. Because when you exchange things and when you actually interact and listen and you build, you're going to come up with much better, more rational ways of thinking about things. And so, anyway, he's not the only three Nobel Prize in economics recipients now have won the award by showing that the brain is irrational. Okay. So anyway, that's why we have to have interactions coming to the teams. And now I've forgotten your original question. What was your original question?
No, it's why is it better than how are the interactions more important than the individual, skills?
Than the individuals. Because, let me say this. If you had super talented individuals and they all had good interactions and they were all listening to one another, then you'd have nirvana. The point is, it's really hard to hire people like that and maintain them, especially without massive egos. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I try to argue against is spending all your time thinking you're going to hire for the perfect team, especially because one of the biggest derailers of teams, besides people not sharing their best information, is some people, owning, speaking too much and having too much power, right? And we know that often the most experienced person in the room is not going to be the one with the best ideas, and that they need to hear these other things and take off on it and blah blah blah, right? And so let me just repeat that one more time in a clear way. It would be fantastic if you could get a really really smart group of people and teach them how to interact well. Build an emotionally intelligent group. It's just hard to do that. And I don't want people wasting their time on that. What I want to do is teach leaders how to build a team with whomever you've got, as long as they can do the task. If they can do their job, you can build an environment and have a high-performing team.
You're not passionate about this at all, are you?
I know. Let me just give you a quote from one of the leaders I interviewed once who said to me, long ago, I realized I'm never going to get all these A+ individuals in my team. This was a leader at Johnson & Johnson, very high level, big company. What is it? Fortune 100 or something, Fortune 50. Of course he could hire good people. He said, you just can't. You can't get them and keep them. He said, from now on, what I focus is building an A+ team. When we work together, we do A+ work. I don't need A+ people to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember some projects in my career where you get the guy who wants to be the black box. I'm the expert. Leave me alone. He doesn't want to play as a part of the team. He's the expert. You give me the information, and I'll give it when I finish. I'll give you the output, and that's not really conducive to teamwork. And we know that no matter how smart you are as an individual, you're going to be smarter as a collective. We just know that.
Yes, we know that, right?
In fact,
it's convincing people that it's hard. Let me ask you: how do you convince people of that?
It's always difficult at first. And I'm not sure you ever convince some. Some are always going to think they're the smartest person in the room. But as a facilitator on project work, what I try to do is, from your experience, if there's 20 people in the room, there's 2 that want to dominate the conversation. They have no problem being the head person and talking. And yet there's 18 other people in the room that have something to add. And so your job as a facilitator is to make sure you draw out the information from the other people so that it at least influences the direction the 2 other people are headed.
Right.
Because it is a team.
Skill.
Otherwise, let's just get rid of the 18 people, save their salaries, and you guys will do it all.
Right. And that's a skill. And so let me add one piece to that. The first norm in our model, we've got this model, the Team EI norms, there's 9 of them. The first one, we call it understand team members. And it's about getting to know the skills that each person brings. And so what I find is that those 2 people who think they're the smartest in the room, and they may be the smartest in the room, once they know everybody else's skill, once they get to know them a little bit, and this is what I've seen, they listen a little bit more. They're a little more capable of saying, well, maybe there's something that person can add. And so that's one of my goals, is to get people to listen to one another and see the value in one another. And that first norm really makes a difference.
Is that the best norm to implement as a first step when you want to shift the culture?
Yeah, so there's three categories of norms in the model. We statistically.
And a norm is just how we operate together. Is that what a norm is?
Yes. Okay. Great question. Thanks. So norm is what's normal here. How do we operate here? So it's your routines, your habits. This is what we do, right? And it's what, this is what we do in this team. And so there's 3 categories of norms that we found. One is all about taking care of the individuals. And it's about getting to know the individuals and respecting the individuals. And it becomes really important because you're going to lose people if you don't take care of the individuals. And you're not going to get people, everybody's going to judge one another until they get to know one another. So that becomes that bucket. The second bucket is about this relentless focus on assessment and adaptation, which is very much about a project management focus, right? So we're constantly seeing, where are we, very assessing. And, so there's 4 norms that fit into that. And then the final one is reaching outside the boundary and getting information that you don't have inside the team. And so again, I know this model fits in well with project management. So those are the 3 buckets. And I always advocate that leaders have at least one norm from each of those buckets. But the most important norm in the model is the one that I first thought was kind of stupid. Like, I couldn't figure out why we kept seeing it in these great teams over and over. And it's this understand team members. It's getting to know what skills, what's the background? What is it that Clint, so he went to Georgia Tech. He's an engineer. He's a tech guy. He's a project manager. This is what he brings to the table. And how does he think? And how does he analyze the problem? And so you get to know people that way. And it doesn't take that much time. You peel the layer of who Vanessa, she's a psychologist. She knows a lot about team, and so then you end up using the skills more and understanding it, asking them questions. By the way, there's nothing that builds respect more or signals belonging more than if someone in the team asks you a question. Then if I say, hey, Clint, you're the expert on project management. What do you think about blah, blah? How often does that happen in the team?
And if they look you in the eye and aren't not looking at their phone while they say it, that's even better.
Right. Or, hey, you went to Georgia Tech. Hey, how about, what's Georgia Tech like? What's your mascot?
Oh, the Yellow Jackets.
Yellow Jackets. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but anything like that, whatever it is. But anyway, it matters.
I think that matters too, because when we do big projects, the team can be global. And there's always this thing about, well, everybody's the expert. Just let them do their thing and we'll figure out how to work together. But what we do is we bring people together in a room face to face for a week and plan the project. And people say, but why do you do that? Because what I need to do is I need to convert you from what is an email address to which I feel no connection into I form some bond with you. And I form that bond through having coffee with you on one morning, bumping into you in the hallway, learning about your family, your kids, and when we do all those things, we have found we can run complex 24, 36-month projects remotely if we form those bonds and if we just bring people together face to face for a week, which is a cost. I understand that, but the bond you form, but let you run everything else. And now I feel accountable to you because now you're a human being, not just an email address.
Exactly. And we know that people who talk more, even when they don't talk about work, but this is research out of MIT, this guy named Sandy Pentland, I can say more about it if you're interested. They end up sharing more information and they end up being higher performers. And they don't have to be talking about work. They can just be shooting the football or the baseball or whatever it is you're interested in. But just quick little personal aside while we're talking about personal stories. I'm actually on sabbatical right now and I'm in London. And I used to teach team emotional intelligence and emotional intelligence at University College London. They used to bring me in once a year to the Bartlett School, which is the construction school. So all these people who were learning project management for large construction projects, I used to come in for a day or two and teach them. And this is at a university here in London. It was so fun. It's one of the reasons why I came back to London for my sabbaticals, because it was so fun. They were so smart, those project managers. They asked such great questions. Yeah. And, it's huge. I mean, you can't make big mistakes in those cases. No, those are huge. Yeah.
It's funny we talk about the social part of it. I was going to get to this later, but I'll bring it in now because it's the natural place. I've been on a project for one of our clients for about the last 4 years, and it's an innovation project at a global beverage company. And it's funny because at the early stages, we had a lot of marketing and a lot of scientists working together. And so we had like a marketing lead and a tech lead. And if the marketing lead got on the call first, I'd love her. And what she'd do is she would be like, "How was your weekend? How are you doing? And what's going on in your world? Oh, happy birthday, happy anniversary." I mean, she was very social. And then if the scientist lead would come on, it was, she's a very friendly person and lovely as well, but she was really more, okay, let's get to the facts, let's get it going. And I found that together they worked really well. But the challenge was if we let the first lady go too long, we'd spend 45 minutes talking about good stuff and only 15 minutes talking about the stuff we really came together. So how do you balance that? Because there has to be a balance, right? Otherwise, because as an engineer, I don't want to jump right to the facts, but then you lose that bonding that you need.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. So first of all, one of the things, I know you've looked at the book, one of the things you'll see in for each of the norms, I say, I've created a table that says, too much, just right, too little. That tells you, because you can do any of these norms too much, getting to know people. And just as one more thing, let me say that you got to remember that we learn these norms from studying the highest performing teams, the top 10% of teams in lots of different organizations. And so they didn't waste time doing this stuff. So for example, getting to know one another with a check-in, just like that, quick, 30 seconds per person or 18 seconds per person or whatever it is. What are you nervous about? What are you excited about right now? Blah, blah, blah. Everybody goes around and you don't waste a lot of time on it, but you do it. And so every norm in our model is designed to be done while you're doing the work. You do need to kickstart by first deciding which norms you want to focus on because every team's different. And so you do need to have a longer meeting to kickstart it. But then once you're doing it, these are all things you do while you're doing the work. Yeah. That's the only thing I can say. I can say it doesn't have to. The other thing is in many of the norms, you get more efficient with how more often you do it. So one of them, as I mentioned, in the second cluster, it's really about assessment. And so we talk about the importance of checking in and saying, okay, what are we doing well right now? What do we need to change, right? And the more often you do that, the faster you get at it, right? People start to trust that you are going to make changes and they'll say more things. They'll say it faster. It doesn't take so long. That's what we see in the great teams. So
I'm with you. And I think it makes you feel more of a part of the group than if you just jump right into the task and it's all. I'm more excited about coming to the meeting when there's going to be a little bit of banter on the front end than if it's just about show me the facts, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah. So let me say that. Yeah, I know you've got other questions. So
it's kind of like nobody will know this unless you're of a certain age, but Dragnet when I was a kid was always a big show.
Oh, yeah.
The detective, I think Detective Friday was like, just the facts, ma'am. And he was a very stern, stoic guy. There's no fun at all in his demeanor.
Yeah, that was a great show. I love that.
So you describe the team leader as needs to be a culture manager. And what does that look like in real behavior?
Okay. That looks like recognizing that teamwork is about building relationships among the members. So if you think about teams as systems, then you recognize it's all about the interactions, right? And it's those interactions that either build the trust, et cetera, to meet one another's needs, like the need to belong. So you can't make yourself belong in a team. You have to be invited in by others. There's really interesting research on that about how the more you try to get in, it's kind of like the middle school kid that comes over and sits at the table. Hey, can I get in here? You can't. So you need to build. So culture management is building those norms. This, for example, starting with the check-in and knowing that that's going to build some respect for everyone, right? Or like you were talking about, making sure that when you're facilitating, you're hearing from everybody, And so the norms in our model are designed to build that community. And that is the culture that you build. And by the way, it can be a little bit more task focused and it can be a little more relationship focused. So what I find is that the model is good for people who are a little too relationship focused, like you're talking about, because it's very tasky. A lot of the norms are very tasky. And then the opposite is also true. So, you got to be a culture manager. You got to manage how people interact, how we do it here, and make sure it's bringing out the best and working well for the team.
Okay, so now I know two facts. I know that you can't give yourself a nickname. It has to come from others. And you can't force yourself into a team. You have to be invited in. I got it.
You have to be invited. Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it?
Well, that concludes part one of my conversation with Dr. Vanessa Druskat, Associate Professor at the University of New Hampshire and author of The Emotionally Intelligent Team. Coming up in part two, Dr. Druskat discusses the importance of trust in high-performance teams.
I just read this study, by the way, that was done by McKinsey. It came out in 2024. Where they found, they looked at all these different variables about what mattered to teams, what accounted for the most, higher performance in a whole bunch of variables. And the one that popped out most often was trust. And it said that teams with trust perform 5 times higher than teams without trust. Think about it.
Yeah.
So what is that about? You interact, you share information, you support, you build on one another's ideas. It's trust is the grease for the wheel, right?
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.